thank all three of the commentators for interesting and provocative comments that raised lots of good questions for me, to which I don't have very good answers. So I think the very best thing I could do in this response would be to show you the photos from my recent trip to Peru and a hike on the Inca Trail. Right. But instead, I will say a few things. I guess some individually, and then maybe a little bit sort of more generally about what I think is what the issues are. So, with respect to some of what Oswaldo talked about, I think probably he and I sort of come at things in somewhat different ways, and it might make it a little hard it would take a lot of time, I think, to talk it all through and figure things out and see where exactly the differences are. So let me just say a little bit. I use the word belief generically to identify a kind of pro-attitude one can have toward a proposition. And I think you can have belief on religious, scientific, theoretical, ordinary topics. I mean, all sorts of things. Whatever the topic, you can have belief. And I think some of what he said, and some of this is based on our earlier conversation, and some of what he said just now, is that in some areas, he sort of worried about the use of the word belief. He said in religion we have faith, although he did call them religious beliefs, but he said they weren't evidential, they weren't based on evidence. And in science, I think, I thought I got the idea that it wasn't exactly belief in some of the theoretical aspects of a science, but kind of acceptance or endorsement of them. And I guess what I want to say is it may well be that there are varying attitudes we have in the different domains. I mean, there might be something different that in fact goes on. So it may be in science we're not, or scientists aren't always, or at least sometimes are not, believing their theories, they're accepting them, where maybe what that means is sort of adopting them for the purposes of carrying out a research program or something like that. But I guess, however exactly all of that works out, it seems to me that with respect to any proposition that any person considers, you can evaluate the quality of the evidence they have for that purpose, and you can evaluate the rationality of a potential belief that they might have on that topic. And so even if there are these different puzzles about or questions about just what the attitudes people in fact have and why they have them, so that even if they aren't believing religious propositions on the basis of evidence, even if that's not what we're doing, we can ask the question whether they have any good evidence for those propositions, any good basis for believing them, and that's the kind of question that I wanted to address. So well, I guess I want to acknowledge that there may well be some differences, but I think that the kind of question I did want to raise can come up in all those domains, and I think it can come up in other domains where I think he does want to say we have beliefs. I think he does. So, for example, when you discover that a friend, colleague, whatever, who you trust a lot, has widely different beliefs about some political topic that you thought, gee, any sensible person is going to think this, and then you find out, well, gee, there's this really smart person who doesn't see it my way. To my mind, that shakes me up. I just wonder now what's going on. So I guess the first comment I wanted to make about his comments was I thought all the questions still remained, even if there was that kind of way of dividing up the issues, and even if people do have attitudes other than belief, and even if those other attitudes were not based on evidence. The one other thing I wanted to say about that was that he describes his adopting of philosophical theories as a matter of philosophical preferences. I think some of it was called aesthetic. And geez, that seems to be not so good for the epistemic evaluation of those theories or the attitudes toward those theories and everything, as they say, downstream from that. So I guess, I remain with this attitude that I think Tom alluded to this in the beginning of his talk, the first part. Well, any one of these questions can be up for grabs and can be assessed in terms of the reasons we have for it, and then so can all the consequences of that. And maybe it's naive and old-fashioned, but so be it. Okay, so that's that. To Mike, first of all, I really like the sort of dry, self-deprecating humor that there was throughout his talk, so that was very nice. And that's not because I just wanted to find something nice to say about it. I'll just say three things, I think. One of the points he makes is that I talked about believing in the cases where you believe something and the other person denies it. And he early, toward the beginning of his paper, he talked about cases where, well, what if you're an agnostic and the other person believes, and what are you supposed to do then? And you can't compromise, and there's not the compromise involved. And he's absolutely right about that. And that's a puzzle for me. And it might be that it would be better to think about all this stuff in terms of degrees of belief or levels of confidence or something, and then you could try to reinstate the sort of view I had about the compromising kind of view. But of course, then you'd have to think in terms of degrees of belief, and I always get in trouble when I try to do that, so I try to resist doing it whenever as much as I can. But I think that's a good point, and something I should take into account. The specific example he gave was worrying about what to do given his own kind of agnosticism about religious matters when he goes back home and confronts people like Planning and Inwagen. I just want to remind him that there's smart atheists around too, so that might help. I guess the two, with respect to the two main points he made, just very briefly. I think one of the things he wanted to say was, well, you can't really share all your evidence. There's the introspective part, and at best, what I can have is your report that you had an experience of a certain kind, or that it seems a certain way to you. And I think the idea is supposed to be that that evidence is sort of way weaker. You know, that whatever evidential value I get out of his report, that it seems that way to him, well, that's something, but it's way weaker than the fact that it seems the way it does to me. And I don't have any particularly nifty thing to say about that, but I do note this. We could make up cases. I won't make up specific ones now, but we could make up cases where if I had no previous information about a topic, I would take his testimony about how it looks to him or how it seems to him very seriously. That would be a really significant factor for me. I don't know exactly. I can't quantify that really significant, but I would take it. Very significantly, at least with respect to a certain range of cases. There'll be a point about that relevant to this a little later on in response to Tom. But if that's true, then I don't see why, when the fact that I've had my own look at the matter, suddenly his what he says about it matters. It seems like the view is it matters less than. And I'm not quite seeing why that is true. So the point again is just, if it matters in the absence of my own sort of direct evidence, then it seems like it should still matter even in the presence of my own more direct evidence. So whether it makes it equal, I can't argue that it makes it equal, but it seems to me that there's a case to be made for the idea that it's pretty significant. Finally, the last part of Michael's paper, he tried to defend the idea that the roughly, well, the by golly, it's my insight, so it really makes a big difference kind of view. I think, and that's the basis for that. I think this is a very interesting idea, that the autonomy point, the idea that if I sort of give too much credence to what you say, I'm losing my own epistemic autonomy, and that's a good thing. And that's, as I say, I find that an interesting idea. Here's one thought about it. It seems to me my autonomy that's a complicated business, and I do trust others with respect to all sorts of things. So, say with respect to, and just to take a trivial example, I kind of like baseball, and my team is the New York Mets, and in recent years they've been quite bad. And I tend to have fairly optimistic views about how they're going to do next time, always. That's what life is like for Mets fans. And I've been out of communication for a while, so I have a whole lot of beliefs about how they've done lately. When I get home, I'll read the newspaper, and I'll cede my autonomy entirely to what it says in the newspaper. That is, I'll give up my antecedent beliefs about all the games they've won in the last couple of weeks and believe the truth reported in the newspaper. Now, I don't know if that's given up on my autonomy or not. I take it, if it is, well, then that's what I ought to do, and if it's not, and it might well be that it's not. And it might well be that it's not because of the following fact about my beliefs. My beliefs include this idea that the newspaper is going to be a good reporter of what they've done. And so it's sort of when I find this conflict between, well, you know, they probably won all these games that I got from wherever I got it, and what it says in the newspaper, there's these two parts of me, and they compete, and they win out, one wins out. But then the same thing happens in cases with a disagreement with a peer. The peer is somebody who, by my own lights, is worthy of trust. And so I'm not conceding my autonomy in any really significant way if I place some significant amount of weight on what that person thinks, given that my own view tells me that I should. So I guess if there is something to this idea about autonomy, I'm not seeing exactly how it really gets to the kind of conclusion you want. Finally, with respect to Tom's comment, the first part of his paper talks about sort of a broader perspective on the on the relativistic kind of view that might say there are reasonable disagreements, and I thought some about that. I didn't include any of what I thought in this paper, and I greatly appreciate what he said about it in his. I think that was right, interesting, and helpful, so thanks. With respect to the hard-line view that he defends, I don't have a conclusive argument against it. I think a thing that I'm unhappy about in the paper as I presented it is I think I ran together in a probably less than fully clear way the issues about skepticism and the issues about a possibility of reasonable disagreement. And I think a way to frame things is this. Tom and I are in agreement that there can't be reasonable disagreements of the sort that I had in mind. And in a way, that was the main point I wanted to bring out in my talk, that the students with whom I began couldn't really reasonably think what they wanted to think. And then the question was, well, in light of that, well, what is the right thing to say? about those kinds of cases, and it seems to me the hard line and the skeptical line are the two remaining options. And it's what's seeming to me now is that it's probably a mistake on, well, may I start the paragraph over? I said that I thought maybe there were different kinds of cases. There was the astrology case where, say, somebody who at least up till now I had regarded as my peer professes belief in astrology and looks at the evidence and says, yeah, can't you see? It's really great. I wouldn't take that as like, I wouldn't be moved by that. I think, okay, this person's just mixed up this time. When it comes to the philosophical cases, maybe the religious cases, you know about that. And some of the other cases, I don't have, you know, some hard political cases, I don't have quite the same view. And I think it's a mistake, and Tom has done some to convince me of that, that I shouldn't, there perhaps a range of cases, I shouldn't just divide them into, say, there's two simple categories. The astrology-like cases where you don't pay attention and everything else where you should be moved to the kind of neutral position. That may well be a mistake on my part, and I think what he said is important. And the view defended here is the idea that maybe that especially when it's new information about a peer who sees things differently, that nudges you a little bit in that direction, but doesn't have to move you all the way to a kind of more neutral overall position. And I'm now thinking that maybe part of what was going on in my thinking about this is the following idea, that what matters a great deal is how well justified you might have been initially prior to learning about that. And combine that with the hard cases that I was thinking about, I thought, well, you're probably not very well justified, you know, anyway. I mean, on, you know, all these hard philosophical questions, gee, who knows, right? So sort of inductively, I'm inclined to be cautious about that, to think at best, you know, when I've thought hard about, say, a new to me philosophical problem, and I come to find myself thinking, well, this is, you know, here's what's probably true. I think at best I'm not very well justified, and maybe a little bit. And then so the confrontation with the peer in that case just has to nudge me a little bit to get me to the kind of neutral position that I thought. So I guess what I think is, with respect to a lot of these hard questions, that are the ones I'm really most interested in a way. At best, we only have very modest justification ever, and if peers make a difference, that they do move us toward neutrality. So, and I think I presented it as a more global point, and it might best apply to a more restricted set of points. So I can agree with an awful lot of that and still preserve some of what I wanted, but I think I might need to back off on some other claims that were implicit in what I made. I'll stop there.